Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome. You're appreciated here because you're going to learn a lot today. I'm Bob Jimenez, Latino, Vietnam vet, former NBC correspondent, university adjunct. I do a lot of writing now, and I'm a political activist. Thank you. And I'm volunteering for Kennedy 24. I'm 78 years old, and a paycheck is not important when God gives you one last chance to make history. And I think we made it at the border, and I think you're going to see it on the screen in a few minutes. It's remarkable. My first job for Mr. Kennedy was to go with him down to the border in Yuma, Arizona, and take photographs of him. And it was then that I told him something he didn't know, that 55 years earlier, when I was 23 years old and right out of UC Davis and a cub reporter, I was with his father the day he was shot. Bam. Instant trust. Instant friendship from Robert Kennedy Jr. And at the time, I felt that there was a bigger goal, a bigger issue that I was involved in than I first thought. Watching Mr. Kennedy peel back the layers of truth that he was after, watching him see for himself the lie that we've been told about the border, watching him see the panicked look on the faces of immigrants who are in harm's way all the way, even when they cross the border. The hundreds of thousands, or I should say tens of thousands of children who are missing. The flood of fentanyl that is flooding across our border unabated. The amounts get bigger every year. And the criminal cartels, bigger, fatter, and richer by $1 billion a year. They now advertise that the border, our southern border, is open. Now, the documentary you're about to see is only 19 minutes long. It's called Midnight at the Border, but it's powerful. It is a remarkable effort of investigative journalism that I've seen in a long time. And the important thing to know is that it is a documentary video that is meant to be made, that is meant to be shown, and is meant to provoke change. Because Robert Kennedy Jr., the very first night that he was there at the border, said what he was seeing was a nightmare. He was seeing perceived or imagined reality of a humanitarian effort, but in truth, he was seeing suffering and injustice. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been lied to over and over again about the situation there. This morning, I hope it stops. Thank you very much. We don't need that anymore, because our border to the south is not safe, it is not secure, it is not under control of the people who should be controlling it. See for yourself.
I feel like the whole country needs to know what's going on here. It's bigger than alarming.
This is the worst I've ever seen it.
They were told they could get a bite at the American dream here, and that dream becomes a nightmare along the journey.
I'm down in Yuma, and I'm going to go look at the border. And most of the movement at the border is at this crossing is between 1 and 3 a.m. I came down here because I want to see firsthand what the problem is and get as many ideas as possible about the best way to solve this problem. Hey.
Good morning.
Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. Welcome to Yuma. So you and Senator Kelly are the only Democrats that have actually come to the border, and I appreciate you being here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you.
I'm grateful to you.
Thank you.
Should we go?
Let's go. I have to warn you that I've had some other high-profile visits, and that day that they came, nobody crossed.
Does that mean somebody on this side
Yes.
with the Border Patrol is telling them?
I don't know if they're with the Border Patrol or where they're with some other agency.
Those people who are associated with the cartels.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And they've had more than 300 assassinations across the border, 25 miles from here, over the last year and a half, because they're fighting for control of the trafficking. Mr. Kennedy, if you want to look ahead, you'll kind of see where the wall begins. This is a new phenomenon for us where we've seen more people coming from Africa than ever before. China, Russia, even the Ukraine. We had a large surge coming from those countries. Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. Buenos días. ¿Qué tal? ¿De dónde vinieron? ¿Perú? ¿Cuánto tiempo tienen viajando? 7 días.
Nos salimos porque amenazaron a mi familia, a mi señora y a mis hijos, de matarlos. Ya habían matado a la mascota y
¿Cuánto les costó de llegar aquí?
la idea, vendí todo lo que tenía en mi casa, no pude dejar nada, todo vendí.
Vendieron todo.
Todo.
They're looking for asylum, right?
Yeah, they're looking for asylum, yeah. Where are you from?
Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, yes.
I'm at the border wall around Yuma, Arizona. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. We've watched about 150 people come across. I was expecting that most of the people would be from Central America. That this is really extraordinary.
Where are you from? Uzbekistan? Okay.
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan. Bangladesh.
Perú.
Perú. Colombia.
Mis hijos están allá.
Ajá.
Ellos ya están en un proceso de asilo.
Oh.
Entonces yo estoy sola en Colombia.
Gracias. Buena suerte.
Gracias.
Of all of these people, only one of them said that they were here for asylum. The rest of them are here for work, for better lives, doing the things that we all want for ourselves. This is at the Regional Health Center. These are some of the people that we saw come across the border last night, and they're now being processed at the health center.
There's a lot of stories that we have heard from the migrants, why they're leaving.
What do they say?
Political asylum, mostly political asylum, and we want to respond in a humanitarian way. We're working, trying to make sure that they're not homeless and they're not end up in the streets.
Damas y caballeros, tengan cuidado, deben comprar sus boletos de avión para...
She is processing these immigrants, making sure that they're healthy enough to travel, and then putting them on buses where they go to every city in our country.
The stations are set up to welcome them, provide them some food, identify where they're going.
We did 2 weeks to travel from Senegal to Nicaragua. After Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, and here. I'm going to New York to join my uncle. My dream is to dream American, to live in America, to work and to help my family.
We coordinate with the airport in Phoenix, and out they go to the final destination the same day.
Here I hope to begin a new life. Yeah, my brother lives here. He's a citizen. Hey, good luck, goodbye.
Most people bring the money or have a sponsor that buys their ticket.
What happens if a family doesn't have the money to buy the plane ticket?
Well, FEMA reimburses us. We can buy the ticket and
So you buy the ticket for them?
yes.
Colombia,
¿De qué parte?
Bogotá.
Yo he estado muchas veces en Colombia, en los llanos y en todas las partes. ¿Cómo se llaman? ¿Cómo? En su mano. Gracias.
El niño también, mi hijo, Joseph.
Joseph, mucho gusto.
Hablando.
¿Y cómo estaba el viaje? Muy difícil.
Más o menos.
Yo soy Jaime Maquera, de Perú. Nosotros hemos llegado 4 personas.
4 personas.
Yo, mi hija y mi señora. Mi otra hija que tiene 18 años. El momento
¿Y
de...
dónde están ellas?
Mi señora y mi hija están conmigo. Pero mi hija de 18 años, no sé dónde está.
Estaban contigo.
Pero en el momento de nosotros estar allá en el refugio, nos han separado y nos han invitado a todos.
¿Y cuántos separados?
No tengo comunicación con ella. ¿Es ella? Por favor, es ella.
We see a lot of violence as people are making across the border through Mexico or their countries. Some of them do share their stories, but we see that devastation in the human lives.
We are sitting here in Yuma, Arizona, right at the Colorado River at the Morales Dam. Behind us is Algodones, Mexico, and a stone's throw just behind us is the state of California.
So that mountain range behind us is California.
California, yes, sir. This is the infamous Morales Dam gap, and what you had is under President Trump, you had a big push for infrastructure, the wall system. And when President Biden took office, he signed some executive orders that basically halted all wall construction. And so that left the gap here. And this was a problem for us in Yuma. What no one talked about was the wall system. It was a package deal. Yes, it included steel, but it also included roads, technology, and sensor equipment. And all that was just put on hold. When you have people that can come through here unmitigated because there's a gap in the wall, it causes a problem for not only for border security, but also for the community.
And that was partisan politics, right?
Absolutely. They halted anything that had to do with the Trump wall. It put our agents at risk. It put the migrants at risk. It incentivized the profit making for the smugglers, for the cartels. It's done just the opposite of what they're trying to accomplish from a humanitarian standpoint. When you are giving people, an opportunity to come here the wrong way because the policies allow them to do that, that's exploiting people, and that's wrong.
What you're seeing behind me here are millions and millions of dollars of materials, including these steel girders, that were purchased by the Trump administration to complete the construction of the wall. When the Biden administration came in, it didn't want to complete the wall, and they left that material to languish and bought new fencing, which you can see over here.
And this is where Secretary Mayorkas told me he would fill in 9 of the 11 gaps. So 18 months later, we see maybe 50 feet completed. Now, the difference between this product and the other product, this has a 10-foot foundation going into the ground, so it's almost impossible to go under. The other new fencing being installed, the foundations are on the top of the ground. So you don't necessarily have that secondary protection under the ground. Where we've seen them start to use horizontal drilling machines to burrow under and use the bank teller type of tubes to send fentanyl and other drugs across the border. We have had up to 2,000 people a day coming across in this area. Where that car is right there, there's actually a bridge that's been built out of 2x12s that crosses the Colorado River. And most of the people are dropped off right over there off of that freeway. They walk across in those large groups that we saw yesterday morning. A lot of the smugglers have directed them towards this area specifically. Now, if these cameras had been activated, they would have been able to observe this. But these cameras right behind us are not active. This is also an area which is infamous that they referred to as the rape tree. We would see Plan B, which is the day after, the morning after pill, found all throughout the ground where the cartel, after taking advantage and raping women and young children as young as 12, it's been reported to us, they would force them to take the Plan B and then send them along their way.
These kids are being exploited all along this track. There's nothing humane about any of this.
We work with child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, elder abuse, and human sex trafficking. Our unaccompanied minors here at the border are incredibly high, far higher than they should be. Imagine being a little kid and being stuck in the desert with no control over who does what to you, and there's nobody around. The youngest one in my recollection was a 10-year-old little boy. It's important to us to finally get people to understand that the dangers that await people as they make this journey, you don't know who you're going to come in contact with. They don't know who they're turning maybe their child over to. So we have 4 forensic interview rooms. These 2 that you're going to see here are child forensic interview rooms. I want you to walk in and see if you can find the camera and the microphone in here.
I think that's the microphone. It's pretty well disguised.
The whole point of that is that the child feels safe. The mics in these rooms are so sensitive that when a child lowers their head because they're feeling shame or they're upset or scared, even if they whisper, those mics are designed to pick up that very muted, quiet voice. In this room, obviously, we designed it to be as comfortable as we can possibly make it, because the reality is no child should ever have to come to this exam room for an exam.
We were averaging from 5 to 15 deaths on the range.
Per year.
Per year. Last year was our highest year ever, where we then were at 50 deaths on the range.
So this is the place where Marine pilots come to train and to practice in simulated war games.
Yes, sir. This installation would be referred to as the Top Gun for the Marine Corps.
How far is this base from the border right now?
Our training ranges are right next to the border.
And why would an immigrant come through the range when they can just walk around the wall in Yuma and register?
So the cartels were using some aliens, purposely making them cross the border into the desert area and saying walk north, and not letting them know that they were going to cross some very harsh environments using them as pawns.
Drones will just kind of sweep the whole area. There's a big group of migrants coming through one area, and they were using the group that was moving in as a diversion for them, the smugglers, the guys doing the dirty work.
So they can push through 300 people. They know the U.S. Border Patrol is going to surge to take care of the people. And then an hour later, they could be coming through with a large drug load, knowing that
somewhere else on the line.
Correct, yeah. And they do the same thing with terrorists, and they do the same thing with gang members that they want into the country. They'll do those diversionary tactics to keep our Border Patrol occupied.
So you have individuals dressed in camouflage, wearing these booties, so they can actually traverse the desert to try to hide their shoe impressions so that they're not able to be tracked by Border Patrol. We don't know where they're going, and we don't know what kind of criminal that we're dealing with, because they do not want to be caught. So they will go through the desert. Here, it's going to be 2 to 3 days walking through the desert from the border of Mexico, through all the remote desert, to get to any kind of civilization. You got to be pretty dedicated, especially with the heat coming on. And unfortunately, not all make it.
And why do you think this happened?
At the end of the day, this is a business for people on the other side of the border. Billions and billions of dollars every month are earned from transporting people and, in conjunction, drugs across into the United States. And that kind of activity doesn't go away easily.
So if you were President of the United States, could you stop this immigration crisis?
Absolutely.
And how would you do it?
If I was president for the day, I would finish the wall where it makes sense. I don't need 2,000 miles of wall from San Diego to Brownsville, Texas. Mother Nature has done really good in areas of West Texas where you don't need a wall. We need technology to help the agents respond. I've talked about tall fences and wide gates. Tall fences, in my opinion, is a metaphor for keeping this border secure, and the wide gates is continuing this nation of immigrants, as well as a legal pathway for those that seek to enter the United States. That to me is very important.
This has been an extraordinary trip for me because on the one hand, last night, I witnessed this dystopian nightmare of this uncontrolled flow of desperate humanity crossing the border and converging here because of misbegotten policies by high leadership of the United States, and landing in this community that has the other side of America, the best that we can represent to ourselves, to the rest of the globe. But after visiting the border, I've come to understand that the open border policy is just a way of funding a multi-billion-dollar drug and human trafficking operation for the Mexican drug cartels. When I'm president, I will secure the border, which will end the cartel's drug and trafficking economy. And I will build wide doors for those who wish to enter legally, so that the United States can continue to be a beacon to the world where diversity and culture make us great.
The names that belong to this magnificent masterpiece: Robert Campos, Donna Cicero, Sharon Jimenez, Del Bigtree, Jimmy Shear, and Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Ladies and gentlemen, and now 55 years after I witnessed a tragic cutting down of a life that had so much promise, I'm feeling a resurrection. So at this point, I'd like to introduce, with your help, the next President of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. Thank you. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out today, and thanks Del and all the other people, and Jimmy, and the other people who put this amazing film together. There's a lot of politicians throughout throughout our history that have talked about the border issue as a way to stir up or to encourage or incite xenophobia or racism or nationalism or all the other kind of alchemies of demagoguery. And I come to this issue from a different place, from a different perspective, and it's a perspective of compassion, of humanitarianism, but also just common sense. A country cannot exist if it can't secure its borders anymore. Any more than a cell can exist if it doesn't have a coherent membrane. The kind of everything, the borders are one of the definitions of our country. And we need to close them. And as the Border Patrolman, who was the former president of the Border Patrol Union and the head of the Border Patrol in that area, he said we need high fences, but we need open gates. We need to change our immigration policy to make it coherent, to make it sensible, to make it serve the interests of our country. Right now, it took me, when I went to the border, it took me 3 days to really comprehend what was happening there because it was so strange. And you heard me do the interview with a woman who wanted to run a healthcare center, where she said, and when people come across, many of them do not have the money. They've been stripped of their money by the cartels. One of the things that immigrants do is they get robbed, they get exploited, they get extorted, they get raped, they get robbed. All of these, we saw people who talked about kidnapping, which is endemic on the border, sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, the smuggling of all these drugs, the methamphetamine and the fentanyl that's coming across, and then the destruction, this assault on the local community where people told us that they wouldn't let their children out during the daytime because they couldn't go play in the yard because they were scared of these strangers that were running across their yard, fleeing from the Border Patrol, which is a very common occurrence there. We visited a hospital, the local hospital. The local people in Yuma were, as I said, they were the representative of the best in our country. The local hospital told us, the director of the hospital, that that hospital had lost $27 million the previous year in unreimbursed expenses caring for migrants. And they cared for migrants. They let migrants come into the emergency room or into the maternity ward at the same basis that they did local people. So the wife of the head of the hospital had scheduled an inducement for her pregnancy, to end her pregnancy, I think it was a C-section, and could not get in because there were 35 immigrant mothers who had filled up the maternity ward. And we saw this all over the city of Yuma, where people were going out of their way to care for the immigrants with compassion. but the community itself was under assault, and this is now happening in communities all across our country. This week, the New York Times had an article that said that 90,000 immigrants had landed in New York from this giant flow of 7 million immigrants over the past 3 years that have come across illegally. 7 million. Compare that to the 3.1 million who entered legally during that period. So twice the amount of immigration is coming across illegally. And we are not managing as a nation our own borders. We have shopped that function out to the Mexican drug cartels. We're making billions of dollars controlling US immigration policy. And all of the carefully constructed immigration policy that we had in our country is meaningless because drug cartels are deciding who gets in and who doesn't. The immigrants and the New York Times article talked about how the tsunami of new immigrants of 90,000 people were crushing the social service systems in New York City. Bloomberg carried a recent article that talked about how officials in New York City are now considering turning Central Park into an open-air migrant facility or migrant camp. So this is the level of crisis, and we talked to people. I did a tour of Cleveland and Harlem in the last couple of weeks. Some of the Lee Harvard neighborhood in Cleveland, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods, and the black-owned business owners and local people were talking about how they could no longer access the Social Security or the social services of their city because they were overwhelmed by migrants. The city of Miami has done probably the best job in our country of reducing homelessness over the past 30 years. They have a model program that's worked. They've reduced homelessness from 7,000 people to 1,000. But now all of that progress is being reversed by the flood of immigrants that is pouring into Miami. And then what happens to these people? Those 7 million people who have come here now, there's 16 million altogether. 7 million in the last 3 years. What happens to them when they get into this country? Because this is supposed to be, many people in my political party believe that we've adopted this to reverse the cruelty of the Trump years and to have a humanitarian policy that is welcome to immigrants. But what happens to these immigrants once they cross that border and they engage, they endure all of the abuse and the rapes and the sex trafficking and the kidnapping of their children and the robberies. We talked to Peruvian families that their life savings was removed from them just before they crossed the border. So they go through that, and then what happens to them when they come into this country? They are still liable for labor exploitation. That's their lives. They are now illegal. There is no way that they can legally work in this country. They cannot support themselves. They cannot pay taxes. Everything they do, we're creating this understory of exploitable poor that will be exploited and will impact the price of labor and the wages of labor for every other American, every working American. These people are being paid by unscrupulous employers $5 or $6 an hour. And that's their lives here now. And there's no way they can change that. They have no leverage. They have no bargaining power. And, I spent a lot of my lifetime interacting with Cesar Chavez, who was one of my father's closest political allies and then became a very, very close ally of mine on the pesticide issue. Over the last 20 years of his life, he became the primary actor in this country, one of the primary activists against farm pesticides, agricultural pesticides. And I worked with him very closely on those issues, and I was a pallbearer for him when he died in 1993. Cesar Chavez was one of the biggest champions in our country, probably the lead champion at that time, for a closed border. because he knew that American farm workers could not make any gains in terms of their wages and their benefits, their quality of life, if there was an endless supply of new workers, undocumented, coming across the border who lacked the bargaining power to be able to ask for higher wages from their employers. Because the employers could always use the threat of exposing them. So we have a policy now that is not serving anybody's interest. It's not serving the interests of Democrats or Republicans. It's not serving the interests of our country, clearly. It's not serving the interests of the migrants. And it's not serving the interests of our neighbors to the south. Everybody is getting hurt by this policy. The good news is that it's solvable. We can stop this. And I will say this, that I was against Trump's wall. I thought it was a crazy idea. To me, it was a big mistake. My sister did a prize-winning documentary called The Wall, showing all the reasons we shouldn't build it. And I don't think we do need a wall, as we were told, that 2,200 miles between Brownsville and San Diego. But we need something. And a lot of that technology was in place. We have the towers, we saw them. Some of those towers were removed, which is incomprehensible to me. We had the cameras, we had the videos, we had the lights, we had the ground sensors, the motion detectors. We can protect our borders. We have the capacity, the technological capacity to do that. We need the willpower, the political willpower to do that, and we need the personnel, and we need to do that for our country. We need, number one, we need to restore those barriers, and again, they don't all have to be physical barriers. We need some barrier so that we know everybody who's crossing. We know every single person who's crossing. We can do that. And if we have the personnel, we can stop that. More importantly, we need to be able to process legal asylum seekers. The one category that comes across the border undocumented are people who are fleeing political persecution. And we have a capacity, we have a methodology for processing those claims. What we should be doing, and what we used to do, is we would process them at the border. And only 15% of them are adjudicated as legitimate. The rest of them, the other 85%, are adjudicated as specious. And then under normal conditions, the specious claimants are not allowed into this country. They're turned away. If we were doing that today, the entire business model for the cartels would collapse. Because these immigrants who are coming into it, and let me tell you first, what happens to the immigrants now is most of the immigrants we saw that evening, none of them were even, only 2 families said they were fleeing political persecution. The rest of us just told us openly, we're coming here to make money. We're coming here for a better life. So they didn't even have that claim. And those immigrants shouldn't be allowed into the country. We should stop that at the border. And the reason but what happens is that they're all given court dates. And the first court date is an arraignment type. It's an arraignment in front of the immigration court. Because we don't have enough judges, it's then a 7-year wait to get a hearing. So those immigrants are allowed into the country. They attend the first hearing, and then they legally go and wait for 7 years. They can't work, but they're in our country legally, and they put down roots. And we don't really know, they become part of this underground economy. And what we should be doing, and the reason we have that is we don't have enough immigration judges. We don't have the capacity to process those claims. And we need to do that, and we need to do it quickly. We need to be able to process them at the border and make a judgment right there. And the people who do not have legitimate asylum claims should not be allowed in, should not be allowed to cross. As soon as we do that, the immigration is going to stop. Because if you put yourself into the shoes, and we talked, at length with these migrants, these are people who have clearly spent years and years thinking about doing this. This is a huge decision. This is the most important decision in the lives of these people. They're deciding to root themselves up, to leave their families, to leave their jobs, their income, to take their children with them and move to a new country with no plans at all. Imagine what it takes to do that. Well, they're making a risk assessment. And if they know that there's an 85% chance that even that 85% chance that even people with asylum claims are going to be turned across the border, and a 100% chance that if you don't have an asylum claim, you're going to be turned back. Not many of them are going to take that risk, and the business model for the cartels will collapse. So we need to be doing that. And right now, when we interviewed these groups coming across, this was one of the sort of shocking but interesting things. They knew every step of the way what was going to happen to them. Nobody was surprised. They knew exactly what to do because the cartels advertise all over the world using TikTok and YouTube. And they give videos to people to show them exactly what they do when they come in through Nicaragua, where a lot of those immigrants were flying into Mexico City. The cartels assist them in getting an internal visa in Mexico City for Mexico. Then they get on a domestic flight to Mexicali. And in Mexicali, there's a parking lot filled with buses owned by the cartels. They load in 55 people per bus. They can separate families there, and parents never see their children again. In many cases, I don't know what happened to that gentleman that we met in the processing center in Yuma who had lost his 18-year-old daughter, but it's frightening. And then they are brought by the cartels to the border. We can watch those buses then unload across the border, and the people come across 55 at a time. And the cartels are making billions and billions of dollars doing that. And the people know because they are advertising in West Africa, in Ukraine, in Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Tibet, and China. So everybody knows how to do it. And of course, this is a huge industry now. Usually they pay the cartels up front $10,000 to $15,000 a piece. But if they show up with money, they may also get robbed on their way. And we heard a lot of those stories. So the last thing that we need to do, the first is to finish the technology and the physical barriers, which are almost complete. And those only need to be in the urban areas, in places where there's high population densities, and then in the remote areas and wilderness areas. We need to put the technology, the surveillance and motion detection technology, and the cameras, the towers, and the lights, and the videos. And then the last thing that we need to do is to change our relationship with some of the countries south of the border, to bring them into a partnership. This trail of immigrants is not good for them, and it's destabilizing. And today, our relationship with the Mexican government is at a low, and we need to improve that relationship and bring them into a partnership with us in stopping the flow of immigration. So these are all things that I'm going to do immediately. This is going to be one of my highest priorities as soon as I get to the White House. We can stop this, and we need to do it for our country. So thank you very much. And I think
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for your vision and your passion on how you will fix the border crisis when elected President of the United States.